Yeah, we're here to talk to Sunil Singh about the power of narrative mathematics. Sunil, I don't, you kind of had a flow and a structure for this, but I don't know if you want to introduce
Sure.
yourself to folks who may not be familiar with you. In full disclosure here, we've been so privileged at HRP to have Sunil as our board president. And as a board member, and it's been awesome to have him contribute to our growth as well. So love to have you whenever we can to contribute to stuff like this.
Sure. Yeah, this is, I think just this conference, the idea of an unconference, the format, discussions, and really getting to the, in the weeds, in a good sense, really what's important in 2022 in education. And I'm going to be talking about math education. And so my work that I do at Amplify, which is a company out of Brooklyn, I help curate and sort of bake in narrative and storytelling into their K-12 platform. And I'm an author. I've written 3 the math books: Pie of Life, Math Recess, and Chasing Rabbits. And most of the work that I do is actually around delivering workshops, presentations, and keynotes on, really the most romantic ideas of mathematics. And as I will talk and will see, the most romantic ideas of learning is the heart of good pedagogy, right? Your heart. Your heart is like the best thing. And so the format we're going to do for this 1 hour, I thought we'd first just have an open discussion for, 10, 15 minutes. Just, what are your ideas about storytelling narrative, and what do you think it would bring to mathematics in a community classroom? And then I'll do my presentation. I'll have another discussion 15 minutes afterwards to see where you sit now. Is it a confirmation, affirmation? Did it challenge your beliefs about mathematics? And, why didn't you pose those ideas in the first 15? What was the block? And, all those things will come out organically. So that's going to be the format.
Excellent.
So let's just start right away. I mean, if anyone who's here, and we do have a number of you here. If you'd like to actually open with, why you're here, and, what do you think storytelling narrative brings, and what it means to you in terms of learning in mathematics, or anything you want to talk about the power of narrative and storytelling. So I'm going to open up to the floor. Anyone who just don't want to chime in, you just go chime in right now. And you can do it by any way you want. If you want to do it in the chat function, that's perfectly so for everyone to read. If you're comfortable, maybe unmuting yourself and want to say hi and lend voice, and that without giving away, when you speak, especially if you talk about a math problem, you could write it on the board. But if you actually say the problem, sometimes by itself, you really capture the essence of this energy of sound. Sound is energy. So you can have inflections and things like that too. Chris, when I think about storytelling math, I think about wonder and discovery. There's so many cool things that are math related, but I also feel like lose the coolness as we look at more and more high level math over time, even though of course they use high level math like exploring space. Yeah, it's really tied into the core, that wonder, awe, discovery, curiosity. And Peter Lilladell, who's a math educator and has written a really good book called Thinking Classrooms, he said, I want you to think about this as other people, I want you to chime in. He says, when do students stop asking why? We don't know. It's quiet in the head. Like, students go from, I want to be active, to this sort of calcified passiveness. And we miss that because it's done very politely and there's a lot of compliance put in. So, that's, this is from Laureen. Sorry, camera off. No, no problems. We, but storytelling and language are so integral to the social dimension that, yes, that's a key word. Social. Like that's, we think that's sort of embedded but it's important to pull it out and to say it like it's social. Yeah, yeah. Have you seen my presentation? Here, humans are storytellers, all cultures like that. I don't know. It seems like you must have accessed my presentation because I'm going to be talking about that. I work with multilingual learners and I'm always aware of how dominant language culture limits. Wow. Thank you for that. That was awesome. Not yet, but all years. Okay.
Go ahead, Links, if you want to unmute here.
Hi, I'm Links. I'm from Panama. I'm a trans human rights educator. Why I'm here, I was very interested in uh, hearing this talk because I got my start as a math educator more than out of passion, out of necessity. Basically, um, I needed some money and I became a tutor, and everybody needs tutoring in math because it is the type of education that people fear the most or argue against the most. And in my experience, almost all of math confusion starts off with fractions. I don't know what it is about fractions that drives people insane. And it's was very interesting for me as an educator to learn the power of example. I had never pictured it as storytelling, and I'm very interested in seeing what storytelling is like. But I found that like even with college kids bringing out a pizza or bringing out chocolate bars and having them cut it up into fourths and or divide poker chips into fractions and like understand what they were really how what they were learning looks like and feels like, which I was very lucky to get in my education, but I know it's not the case of most people.
Mhm.
And I think that is a huge thing with math. We see math as so divided from the real world, so hypothetical that we can't apply our regular forms of logic to it. And so people grow up with this belief that they are inherently bad at math.
So what you're actually doing is giving reason for why storytelling is important, because that idea that the mathematics that resides intrinsically in us, historically in us, has been extricated. So it's all the idea of storytelling is a return. There's also a returning element to the roots. And we've said some key words already about storytelling, roots, social, community. There's a lot of power there, and it's really important to pull that out. We know it's powerful, but it's really important to actually say some words. Again, words are powerful because of sound. You can type them in, but to say them repeatedly as a community of learners and teachers is very important. Skylar, storytelling is a way to bring math to life as opposed to flat, dead subject that it can be traditionally viewed for many students. You just said it right there. If you ask students, like they would think without articulating it, that math is dead, closed, all discovered. It's inert. It doesn't have a history or past. As I've said many, many times, I think Nick and Chris have already heard me say it. Students would think that, aliens dropped off mathematics in a test tube on a beach 100 years ago. That's how inert and, sort of as a polymer, like it seems like it was synthesized in a laboratory. And so when you say bring it to life, absolutely. How do you see the relationship between math and concept of certainty in education? Can you clarify that, Links, what you mean by the concept of certainty?
Um, the first keynote speaker we had talked
Yeah.
about how we need to move away from the idea that education is certain, like there's one right answer.
Okay, thank you so much for, yes, okay, absolutely, okay. The questions and ideas that you've said, all of you, is like, I mean, honestly, I didn't know which format. I wanted discussion based, but I go, you know what? Let's have discussion first before there's any bias in a good way by anything you might see. So now I'm actually going to start my presentation, and you're going to see, I think, hopefully a lot of affirmation of the ideas and words that you've already so well articulated. So thank you all so much for just contributing and just sharing already. And of course, we're going to have time at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. And yes, you can see my, let's start slideshow. Okay. So just to, again, always check, everyone can see my screen?
Yep.
Super, thank you. So just to let you know, this is I'm going to be giving this presentation at a couple of conferences, one actually in a couple of weeks in San Diego, 90 minutes. So this is obviously a truncated version of it. I'm also giving it at the National Council of Teachers Mathematics Annual Conference in Los Angeles end of September. Again, it would be the larger one of it, but I thought, you know what, there's so much here that I want to share it at this conference too. So this is a shorter version of it, but you know, let's go. I wrote this actually before I started writing my books. It actually never made it into any of my books, but I remember writing this and wanted to make some sort of image in Canva, you know, in terms of trees or something. I don't know, but I did write this, I think 6-7 years ago. And if you think about, you know, the Human Restoration Project and this conference and everything, especially the last sentence, it becomes binary. Like it is down to two choices. You know, what is it? Is it a bridge or a barrier? And currently for, I would say, most students, knowingly or not, it's a barrier. It's a barrier. And it's quite a ways to get to even knowing that we need to have a bridge, and what does that bridge look like? So this is just something as a seed of thought to drop in early on. So we talked about, you know, storytelling is how it's been around for a long time. So something very odd happened in 2017 in December. 3 publications, The Atlantic, I forget the other 2, all in their science section, 2 on December 5th, 2017, and 1 on December 12th, all published similar articles about storytelling and the desirability of storytellers. Which is, maybe it was just sort of in the air, a coincidence, but it was very strange. So one of the stories which I now tell, which I learned, was a story from the Agda people. And it takes 30 seconds. It's not a long story. But there's a reason why I'm telling it and how it's related to the idea of narrative in mathematics. So the story goes, and it's been told for thousands of years, is that there was a wild pig and a sea cow. And they used to race every day. Every day they used to race until the sea cow hurt its legs. And then the wild pig carried the sea cow to the water, and they continued racing. The wild pig on land, the sea cow in the water. 25, 30 seconds, right? And that story was actually used by Jeffrey Kluger. That's where I learned of the story. And I think this is the Times. I think it could be the Times. But look where it is in Science and Human Behavior. So again, the science of it, right? There's a pedagogical idea basis to all of this, in terms of why it's important. And stories help us look at the past, but as a 13-year-old kid in 1977, 10 words riveted me about stories for the future. Sorry, I thought that slide's coming up. So if you were asked to make a lesson plan about these concepts, it might take you 30, 40 minutes. But these are the bullet points of the story told by the active people, you know, between the sea cow and the wild pig, which took 25, 30 seconds. That's one of the power of storytelling. It just puts all those things we're trying to put in these sort of, you know, sometimes inert lesson plans, and puts them in a way which resonates in a much more effective, efficient, and way which is like lasting. So just to give you some background, I also have been doing keynotes about storytelling, especially during the pandemic where everything was virtual. This is one I did for a conference in Pennsylvania in terms of storytelling. So it is definitely in the water right now. This concept by John Conway is also something which is also, to me, very important. How do we educate students? Well, aren't stories usually very interesting? Useful things seem like things which like you would see in a beige index card or something, very inert. And so when I think of mathematics, okay, like in my head, the vision, it's very magical. It is like this sort of door you're going to find in this dewy forest. Like that's the way I see mathematics. I'm not making this up. This is how a lot of people have thought about mathematics. It is this magical portal into understanding not just the universe as an external vector of, you know, what mathematics can do in society, but also who we are. Like, you know, why are we here? It helps us, you know, get to some of those deep existential questions. So this is why I think, you know, storytelling is important. And just to introduce some pedagogy here in terms of storytelling. This is Alfred North Whitehead. His theory of learning, which was in Aims of Education, 1929. That was a must read when I went to Teachers College. Now, if you look at the rhythm of learning, it's very inclusive at the beginning when childhood, which is romance. I'm going to just skip that for a second because it doesn't happen, by the way. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for almost any subject, but especially math. So now it's a house of cards. It's all going to fall apart. It doesn't matter what the next two stages are. Now we get into precision. So this is where you want to be very, very mindful of, you know, all the different techniques and steps and be correct. And then generalization as you come out into adulthood in terms of what you can apply. But if that romance isn't there, it all falls apart. And what's the best way to deliver romantic ideas and seduce your students about mathematics? You tell stories. Like this is, it doesn't get more simpler and yet complex at the same time, is because we missed that cutoff. We went straight to precision. In fact, to make it even more damning, what we've romanticized is precision. Oh, to be correct. Oh, share your strategy. We get like, that's where our romance is. Our romance should be just in the subject itself without any idea about being right or wrong. And so, yes, stories transfer energy. And this is Nandy Bushel, 2021, August. I love this picture. And not St. Louis Park, because I did a workshop for them. That's why I kept the logo there, but that's what stories do. I was going to take out the text. I will be taking out the text in San Diego. And we'll be asking people to identify who the baby is, right? And this is a story of Ramanujan and how, you know, the Indian goddess came to the grandmother in terms of foretelling that one day the tip of God in terms of mathematics Ramanujan would have. I mean, it's myth, it's storytelling, but Ramanujan goes on to become one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. Why am I getting these blotches? That is strange. I'm just going to advance my slides this way. Oh, don't know what happened. Okay, it's okay. It's all part of being real. So here's a slide that when they ask you, what do you notice, what do you wonder, right? There are all the questions are here. Who are these people? What time period is this? What do they have in their hands? It's all the key questions of, and who are they? Sorry, I missed that one too. Does anyone want to put in chat what if they can answer any of those questions? What time period? What are those building? What's that building in the back? It looks like apartment buildings. Does anyone want to put in chat, like answer any of these questions? Like if they think know the answer, what time period? Who are these people? What are they holding in their hands? Right? They're all holding the same thing. Anyone want to put in chat? What do you think is going on? Let's see if I can see. Reminds me of the river delta. It looks like form of trade, maybe rice. Yes. Okay, it is a form of trade. The people look like they're holding sacks. What are they holding in their sacks? It is trade. That's the key question. What are they holding in their sacks? Okay, links, they're gonna get salt. That's what they're gonna get in exchange. They're holding gold dust. And think from a student's perspective, like they're thinking, why would you want to get salt by trading in gold? So now this is starting to frame exactly where we are. So we're in southern Mali, around the 1100s. Those aren't futuristic apartment buildings. That is actually the largest mud structure in the world, which is a mosque in southern Mali. And now you can talk about, kids go, well, why would you want salt? Well, why was salt important at that time? And you can talk about the great empires in terms of Ghana, Mali, in terms of the salt trade. Now, this is actually a visual from Amplify to start discussing the balance and algebra. So what they're doing is they're not taking out any of the mathematics. They're putting in all the narrative up front to create the discussion and to give context. So this is what it looks like in terms of the platform. And you can see, and I put that note there, the narrative context up front. African salt trade. It's not like this is like if you got time to get to the extension, they're putting in the correct culture responsive piece right away, and all the familiar things you see about mathematics in terms of balance and hanger tree diagrams, that's all there. But what has never been there before was the narrative. That's what was missing. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose, right? That's what's missing. And just to sort of continue out for North Whitehead, and this is completely in line with HRP in terms of, there's only one subject. It's called life in all its manifestations. So when you have narrative, you tell a story, you can have mathematical ideas intersect with non-mathematical. What do people look like at that time period? What language do they speak? How do they live? You can't have mathematics be extricated to sit at like some sort of inner piece, which it has been. And that's a Western idea of mathematics. I just posted something on Twitter about us. I've always tried to find analogies to why we're doing things incorrectly. And the one is, imagine this world buffet. Okay, a world buffet. But all we've been doing is eating, and I like this too. I mean, pasta, sausages, things which are like European fare. Now there's other food there too. There's falafel, there's curry, there's spicy noodles, there's tribal soups. We're not going to take that stuff away, but no one's trying this. And the irony is this stuff came out of the kitchen first. There is completely your idea of the thematic development of mathematics. We're not going to take any food away. We're not going to replace stuff. We want people to try this food, which the kitchen actually made first. So when you get, again, about the salt trade, you get to show a map like this, which might occur in social studies or humanities or geography. You get to talk about the silk trade. You're going to see where it intersects with mathematics in terms of not just the actual stuff which is coming up in terms of physical things in the silk trade, but also intellectual knowledge. You can see how the trajectory of it was from India, China, through the Middle East, eventually to the West. I mean, there's like about 12 hours of storytelling here, which reaches a 13-year-old Fibonacci, who's better known as Leonardo of Pisa at the time, because as a whim, he asked, "Hey, Dad, can I follow you on one of your business trips to this northern port of Bougia in Algeria?" And by just hanging around the ports as a 13-year-old teenager, he got a lot of the knowledge which is coming up from the Middle East about arithmetic and algebra. And he helped at that time write the book Liber Baci, which was more or less an idea to help merchants do the math as opposed to sending that math off in terms of, whether it was like, ratios, proportions, and sort of inheritance, things that they didn't know how to figure out, which we take for granted. At some point, people couldn't do that. Everyday people couldn't do ratio proportion questions. And we don't tell that to kids. What you're learning right now, people didn't even know how to do. Like the history of mathematics is about slow failure. That's if you want to come to the show of mathematics, that's what it is. And we don't tell that story in school. And here's the actual mosque. And they have to rebuild it every year. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but there's not a lot of people there to maintain it, but they do build it every year. There it is. That's the built once a year. So, I mean, I talked about, their salt trade, and of course the idea of balance and how much salt would you get if you trade. Like, there's math questions there, but really it's a Trojan horse. You're trying to bring in other subjects and other histories and other cultures every single time you talk about math. That's what you were trying to do through storytelling. And then, I mean, I've used this Sumon Kid quote quite a bit. If you really want to get to that sort of what happens when we don't tell the stories, right? This is what happens. And it's not articulated this by students, but they do feel emotionally something like this. There is an emptiness to it. And the segue I want to do here in terms of storytelling, because this is a recent story to me. And I like, when I give presentations, I always like to update things I've learned. That's the best part. I love having a new presentation because something I've learned. And this book called Emergence, one of the things it talks about is the failure of the Chicago projects, which was built from 1950 to 62. And they're collectively deemed as being a failure, unfortunately. And this book documents the reason why they're a failure is because of lack of sidewalks. And that because there's lack of sidewalks, there was no physical place to build community, to talk, to learn about each other. You just went from A to B to C. There was that sort of, again, existential angst of not being like, why are we here? And so related, and by the way, I used to live here, Lausanne, France. And in Europe, they have these piazza squares, Italian, but these squares are everywhere in Europe where there's no vehicular traffic and it slows life down. I'm not saying I met all these people. I could have, and sometimes I did. But having sidewalks, large spaces, meeting spaces, like the commons they used to have, in colonial America, like a meeting space, or in Greek history, like the forums, like in this discussion, like to talk like this is very important. So, where are our mathematical sidewalks? Where do students have a place to meet to talk about math? Like in kindergarten, they got those carpet areas, which is wonderful. But after a while, they're gone, and kids are sort of siloed into their desks, and mathematics becomes an individual competitive pursuit. That's a very Western, and I think unhealthy take on mathematics, especially if you think about the roots of mathematics, which is more from the East. It has more of a philosophical, self sort of healing. Everybody went to mathematics prior to formal education, did so voluntarily, and not because there was a STEM career waiting. It's because they were just, mathematics was an enchantment itself. They didn't know what they were doing was right. In fact, sometimes it was wrong. And when I tell the story of math, I like to always, I have a music, background too, in terms of interest in writing. And this quote by Brian Eno is saying it. This applies now to everything. There is no evidence of human life left. It's leaving us. And I mean, it always comes back to, again, restoring humanity, the Human Restoration Project. That there's a raison d'etre to all of this, right? We're not making this up. There's a moral urgency to this. Now I'm going to share with you two images, which I think are going to be quite familiar, but there's a reason why I'm sharing these particular images of these two bands. This is an image from Get Back, the documentary, which I'm guessing some of you have seen or at least heard of. Some have made my way all the way through. It is quite fascinating to be a fly on the wall. So I want you to remember this picture with the next one too. So there was also a kind of not as famous documentary made about the Stones' exile on Main Street because they're having tax issues in Britain. They had to sort of, really like flee to France to record this album. And if you think about the previous picture of the Beatles and you look about this one, it's quite messy, right? Like the heart of making art is mess. The sort of this picture here feels like the detritus of songwriting at 2 a.m. in terms of how many packs of Marlboro cigarettes has Keith Richards gone through. And, it's a wonderful picture, which captures the essence of what art making looks like. And so in the third chapter of my book, Chasing Rabbits, I quoted Brené Brown because really the idea of mathematics is a mess itself. Like, unless the answer is 0, infinity, undefined, indeterminate, I don't care about the answer. I don't. Nobody has. It's more about the process, about being in the moment of the mess that you're in. And you don't even know if there's going to be a solution. And we've just sterilized it. We've cleaned it up. It's not recognizable. The mathematics that we do in school, to me, is not recognizable to the mathematics that actually has been done for thousands of years. Slow failure, fast success, like good luck squaring that circle. Why do you think there's so much stress, anxiety with students? Because I think somehow they know that this is not the way you're supposed to do mathematics. So the power of narrative. So this will be actually like the last thing I share. And it's actually a math question that I will do in San Diego. And it's something, you can do a little bit and think about. So when I present this question, I want you to think about it as if the narrative was not there. Okay. How interesting would this question be if there's no narrative? Would you still do it? Maybe, I'm not sure. Okay. So if I asked you, oh, I accidentally clicked ahead. My finger went on my mouse pad on my Mac. I apologize. So the question was going to be, if you just have ones and twos, right? And it's always got to add up to 8. How many ways can you arrange those ones and twos? So it always adds up to 8. So you can have 8 ones, you can have 4 twos, you can have 2 2 1 1. As long as it adds up to 8 and you just use ones and twos, how many ways are there to do it? It's very inclusive. Everyone's going to start writing all the different ways. And I'm not saying it's efficient, but it's a good way to do it. Well, here's a way to do it, which involves math strategy of start with a simpler case. Now, if there's only like the number 1, if you only got like add up to 1, there's only one way to do it. If you add up to the number 2, there's only 2 ways to do it, 1, 1, and 2, right? If you have the number 3, like it's got a total 3, then you have 3 ways. So it seems very trivial, like there's nothing going on here. It's quite boring. But once you have the total of 5, you can see that, sorry, total of 4, you have 5 different ways. Can anybody type in chat in the 2 minutes or 3 minutes we have left what this sequence looks like? We have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Like when you have the total 5, you can see there's 8 ways using 1s and 2s to get 5. Anyone recognize this sequence? 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. I'm looking at the chat, by the way. It looks like Fibonacci. Everyone, just nod. Yeah, Fibonacci. Yeah, for sure. Definitely is Fibonacci. If you add the previous 2 numbers, we're getting the next number. And by the way, just an aside, you can start with any 2 numbers. You could start with -79 and 3, and you keep adding -79 and 3, get a new number, you will get the golden ratio. It doesn't matter what your seed numbers are. It just happens that you could start with Fibonacci's rabbits, but that golden ratio, if you follow that pattern of adding the previous 2 numbers, you'll eventually get the golden ratio of 1.61, of dividing one number before the other one. By the way, this is Fibonacci, but he was not the first person to discover it. And that's the power of narrative. So this pattern was first discovered by Hemachandra about 150 years earlier than Fibonacci. Now, one thing I want to make clear here is it's not a competition. It's not a competition, because there wasn't like they were sending emails back and forth, or, like they had no way what was happening in different parts of the world. But we know that in Sanskrit poetry by Hemachandra, it was discovered first. And in Sanskrit poetry, you have 2 kinds of vowels, long and short. Long, guru, take up 2 spaces. Lagu takes up 1 space. 1 space, 2 spaces. How many different poems can I write if I have those 2 syllables? Now, remember the original question was with 1s and 2s. I didn't even put a story, but Fibonacci came out of it. So we can talk about Fibonacci, we've already spoken about when he was in, 13-year-old teenager. I can cycle back to that. But now, really what I'm setting you up for is the actual roots, which is Sanskrit poetry. So you could have language students in your class. You could have students of that culture who are familiar with Sanskrit poetry, who never would have thought that that's where these numbers come from. And they become more alive in maybe in your classroom and things like that. So that's how much time I want to spend on this. This is actually a 90-minute presentation, the one I'm giving in San Diego. So I have much more time to go in more detail, but I hope that's a little sort of, appetizer of why narrative and storytelling is very, yeah, it's very important now in math education. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Do we want to open the floor, Sunil, and bring it back around to your opening question,
Yeah, sure.
and maybe we can get some thoughts on how our understanding of storytelling perhaps has changed, or perhaps even our understanding of the narrative mathematics portion of things too. Because one thing that I put in the chat that I found myself making some connections to was from Denisha Jones's Q&A based on her keynote, which at least a good portion of it was focused on her understanding of the role of play, particularly this true play, which she had learned out of this Anji true play. For my ignorance of this, but my understanding, perhaps it comes out of China. But there are these Anji true plays, like there's Reggio schools or Montessori schools and things around the world. And when you were going through the question about the Fibonacci sequence there, and you were saying this might not be the most efficient way to talk about this thing. Well, neither is play efficient at the same time. So I don't know. You would seem to have some thoughts about that. Like, what do you think is the role of play in mathematics to kind of bring things together for our attendees?
I love that question because it's so the idea of efficiency comes up a lot in math. And my response is that students should not be exhausted by their strategies until they are. They shouldn't be told by anybody that's an exhausting strategy. If they want to do it by brute force, go right ahead. Do it. If you want to count on your fingers and toes until you're 85, go right ahead. Because that bridge to efficiency has to come internally by practice, by play. It'll come, all those things, modifications will come through play. But if you make them say, well, you should adopt this strategy, and if they do, you're basically making them, back to what I said in the beginning, passive learners. Now they're just going to be waiting for you to tell them what to do, right? And that's such a dangerous, once that happens, it's you can't go back. So just sort of going back to the beginning in terms of, we had an open discussion for 15 minutes, and now we have about 13 minutes more. I'd like to just people's reflections and thoughts, affirmation of what they were thinking already, a little bit more color, just whatever you're thinking at this point, having seen a little bit. There's so much more here. I am going to say a closing remark about it, but again, what do you believe firmly as to what storytelling could do, classroom mathematics, or just education learning in general?
I'm not sure if you saw this question in here, Sunil, but right away at the beginning of the presentation, Leaf Cresswell put this in the chat, and Chris kind of bumped it back up. But Leaf asked, can flat word problems turn into genuine, inspiring, and actionable storytelling for math, as opposed to dressed up number problems, or do they need to be designed from the outset with narrative?
Oh, that's a really good question. Flat word problems are one of the worst things that have happened. What happens if you share a flat world of, here's what happens. If you share a flat word problem with students, you lose their trust. They don't trust you anymore. If you at least edit it saying, okay, I don't know who designed this question, it's on the sheet. If you give some feedback to it, but that's why we should be very careful about, we only have a finite amount of time with students. We only have a finite amount of time, period. So just like there's a quote about, reading the best books first, or, whatever, the best, think about the math problems you're going to do, because is it going to turn a student off of mathematics, or is it going to turn them on? The only metric I ever want to use if I'm a classroom teacher, do my kids exit my classrooms more curious than the day before? That's the only thing that it'll go, hey, Cheryl, are you more curious today? Yes, I am. Mohammed, a little bit. I don't know. I'll think about it. That's my only thing I want to check, because if those kids say yes, yes, yes for 12 years, guess what? All the mathematics they need to know will be in the dragnet of that curiosity. Automatically. Just as we're
Yeah,
looking
go
at
ahead.
more feedback, because I don't want to. So this is what I wrote recently. This is my 2022 update of myself, just in terms of storytelling, and it's changed over the years. So storytelling leads us to romance, the messy middle of mathematics, and more importantly, the healthy idea of teaching with imperfection. It gives us it gives us permission to be imperfect. It's telling us if you're not imperfect, you are doing the math incorrectly and you're not being human. That's what it's going to tell you. And if you don't listen to those stories, you're going to think otherwise, and you're going to get to that alien sterilization, whatever that analogy I put. Imperfection with vigor. So not only are you going to teach imperfection, you're going to be vigor. Like, you're going to be so enthusiastic about, like, I don't know where I'm going. Did I just, okay, you know what? I made a mistake. Like, that is the normal discourse of mathematics. When you start telling a good yarn about math, you open up a classroom and invite all students to chime in about the story. Their curiosity will invariably ask questions that you do not know the answer to. When I tell a story, someone's going to go like about that story about the Salt Empire. I'm hoping a student's going to ask me a question about, so when did they start, when did food preservation come in? When did salt become like less valuable? I don't know the answer to that. I don't. But now that student owns a question which they can find the answer. Like, this is, if you open up, it becomes more inclusive of the types of questions you can get versus right or wrong. Like, you know, like that's what it does. That is the, their curiosity will invariably ask questions that you do not know the answers to. That is only a stressful burden in math education to not know. In mathematics, it's a dominant theme of its historic development. Students will soon find tiny rabbit holes that they can own and fall down in, that they can help contribute to the color and texture of an evolving, this is important, of an evolving, inclusive, and romantic story of mathematics. That is why storytelling is important in teaching math. It's a window into its past and a mirror for its eternal wisdom of learning. That's what I've come up with, like, now in 2022. It's everything is there in storytelling. Everything that we need is there. There's nothing missing, and it's the most human trajectory of mathematics. Chris,
Do you want to go ahead with your question, Chris?
Yeah, I can read it out loud. So I was
Okay.
saying that, Sunil, when you were talking about really all those stories, but particularly what stood out to me that was that sidewalks question, because
oh,
my social studies and design brain's like, man,
I
you could make a whole thing, and then you could like talk about like, are there sidewalks in my city or in the school? What is a school sidewalk? There's so many different things you could think about. But then I can't help but think logistically about rote pedagogy and looking at that sheet at the beginning of the year, and there's like 50 concepts to cover, and they're a giant checklist. And I guess especially in math, I feel like maybe as someone who really still does not understand math very well, at least in the school context, I look at all those concepts and I don't know how connected they are to each other. As in, does one really build off the other in a sense that if I taught 3 months about sidewalks in my class, when I actually hit these abstract math concepts that are on that sheet of paper, how do we actually utilize that in a way that's meaningful when the system really works against that?
well, the system is it doesn't even know what it. We've almost lost touch of everything, like the humanness of learning. And so 20 years ago, you talk about not understanding math. It took me 10 years of teaching calculus to finally go, I think I'm getting it. And by the way, every honest math teacher will tell you that. Any teacher who says they understood calculus the first year they taught it, or the second or third, is lying to their teeth. I'm sure there's some people walking who mathematical geniuses, whatever, but for the most part, and I was a pretty good math student, but I was taught to just, like inhale knowledge without really processing it. I could ape very well. I was aping for a long time. I even aped my lessons. But then I go, do I really understand this? I don't. And so 20 years ago, my mentor, Peter Harrison, going back to sidewalks, he used to give these really hard problem sets to the students. Now, he said, these are hard. You can ask anybody for help except me. You can ask other teachers in the school. You can ask your brother and sister. You can ask your parents. You can ask college professors. He was only interested in extending the radius of conversation about mathematics. He didn't give a toss about the answer. So he was using mathematics to create sidewalks, because he knew that the answer was irrelevant. That was 20 years ago.
Now, Sunil, as we're wrapping things up here, oh, hey, Lauren has a question in here. Okay, maybe more of a comment.
Yeah.
Okay, math curriculum, honestly, most curriculum is integrated and spirals and builds an understanding, but as teachers, we don't know enough about the big picture to understand and teach the connections ourselves. We need storytellers in our learning as teachers.
Well, that's a really, at the late part of the presentation today. So this is going to open up something much bigger from Lorraine's comment, my apologies. So I have an image that I share. It's called the Borromean rings, and there's 3 rings. If you actually take one of the rings apart, the other 2 fall apart. So I've talked about stories and mathematics, but there's 2 other rings which are important here. The story of our students and the story of ourselves. And it only makes sense if all 3 are in play. So you can talk about the story of mathematics all you want, but unless you hear the story of students and also the story of teachers and their journey with mathematics. Do you want to be vulnerable? Do you want to share your challenge with mathematics? Because if you just come into the classroom and you've already done the question at home or in the math office, that's very disingenuous, because you're never sharing your struggle or thinking. And that actually creates tension with students, because they figure they got to get the answer right proportional to some degree how fast you can get it. You never just show like you're all warts and boils about math, like, okay, let's do question number 9. Okay, I'm stuck. You're stuck in front of your students in real time, right? That's very important.
Now, Sunil, what I was going to transition into is kind of thinking as we leave this conversation and go back to the conference or back to our own contexts, or take a break for the day, because we've had a good morning of a good chunk of the day of learning here. Who inspires you in this work? Who do you follow in this sphere, or who would you recommend our audience here and the people who are going to watch this later, who should they connect to if they want to keep the conversation going, other than yourself or the Human Restoration Project?
The first person that comes to mind, there's lots, and there's so many good people. But I'll mention Dr. Chris Charles. He just does a lot of amazing, powerful work in equity in math education, and just fights the good fight about everything that's happening right now. Berkeley Everett. Now, he's a K-5 math consultant in LA. And the reason why I mentioned Berkeley Everett is that his background is not math, even though he's a math consultant now. His background, he's a classical jazz pianist. And he is what I would say why it's important to bring in people who don't have math specialist backgrounds to become math teachers and trainers, because they have a lens that they came through which is completely different, a social humanities lens, which is missing from math. So the 2 that I would recommend at the top, Berkeley Everett, Dr. Chris Charles, Crystal Watson. Oh my God, she's from Ohio. She's amazing. There's those 3 right at the top of my head: Crystal Watson, Dr. Chris Charles, and Berkeley Everett in LA. his math flips are fantastic.
Well, awesome, Sunil. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and our
Oh,
audience here today. And good luck at your conference. For attendees here, the last one of these sort of live sessions will actually be tomorrow. I'm kind of thinking about how we can continue the fight, because that will be the conversation we have with Jennifer Berkshire in this space here tomorrow afternoon. So yeah, if you want to continue this conversation, you can bring it back onto the Discord. Sunil, you're more than welcome
Absolutely.
to join us
Oh,
in there as well.
Yes, yes, I'd love to. Yes, please keep all the conversations going, whether in the Discord or, Twitter or whatever it is. Just it's important to keep the energy going. I mean, it's going to diffuse itself obviously as we go into the school year, but I think it's important that the work that's happening in the conference and stuff, that we keep the conversations, courageous conversations happening.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sunil, and thanks for all of you for joining us as well. Have a good
Thank you
rest of the
so
day.
much, everyone.
Thanks, Anil.
Take
Enjoy
care.
California.
Thank you so much.